Well, welcome to the book of Haggai. You might say, what? There is a book called Haggai in the Old Testament? Yes, this is a book of the Old Testament. It's one that we don't know a lot about or hear a lot about, but it is in the Old Testament, so we're going to talk about it. Now, Haggai is a fast forward from where we've been. Most of the prophets we've been talking about have been going back towards Isaiah's time frame, so pre-Babylonian exile, pre-Babylonian destruction, that kind of time frame. Haggai is after all of that, after the exile. In fact, he's one of the first prophets we encounter that is post-exile in nature, basically. So this is after the 70 years of being in Babylon, and the people are going to be released back to go to Jerusalem and rebuild, basically. So that's where Haggai comes in. So a quote I have here, a little bit more about him. This comes from the New Bible Commentary from Guthrie and Motyer. It says, Haggai, the earliest prophet of the post-exilic restoration of Judah, is known apart from this book only from the references made to him in Ezra. These show him as a contemporary of Zechariah, serving in Judah and Jerusalem. As a result of their joint ministry, the work of rebuilding the temple was resumed and completed. Nothing is stated about the private life of Haggai, and it is generally assumed that he was one of the main group of exiles who returned from Babylonia following the decree of Cyrus in 538-537 BC, which allowed the rebuilding of the Jerusalem temple. So if he would have witnessed the initial work, then undertaken, and the subsequent lapse of effort in the face of opposition. Now, this was a time when the outlying provinces of the Persian Empire, each under their appointed governor, were deprived of direct help from the central government. The enlightened policy of encouraging local autonomy in secular and religious affairs, initiated by Cyrus, by whose decree the first return of Jews had begun in 536 BC, had ceased with his death some 6 years later. His son Cambyses showed less sympathy to vassal states, and this doubtless contributed to the failure of the Jewish people to press forward with the reconstruction of the temple at Jerusalem, where work had come to a standstill soon after the arrival of the first returnees under Sheshbazzar, the Judean governor nominated by the Persians. This interruption was prolonged by the opposition of the Samaritans and local landowners, which led to a prohibition of further work. Morale was low, and men concentrated on the betterment of their own circumstances. To them, it was an inappropriate time to spend effort and wealth on God's house. So this kind of lays out the challenge they have. They're going back to Jerusalem, and they're like, we want to rebuild. Now realize most of the people that are going back weren't the people that left Jerusalem. 70 years has passed, so a little more than an entire generation. So most of the people going back were born during the time Babylon. So they've only heard stories of Jerusalem. They didn't come from Jerusalem. Their parents or their grandparents did. So now they're going back to Jerusalem to rebuild, basically. They don't know what it was like before, when Jerusalem was built still. They hear the stories, they hear the legends, the ideas, but most of them weren't alive when that happened. Some probably were. Some lived quite a long time. But again, if you were alive and old enough to remember what was happening in Jerusalem and to understand that, you're like 80 to 90 years old as you leave Babylon to go back. So not in that day and age, that was a very long life. Most people, I think the median age was probably closer to 50 back then, basically. So they're going back. Cyrus is letting them go. They're going back to Jerusalem and wanting to rebuild the temple, but because, again, they still have to make their own houses, they still have to build their own life up, they still have to do things for survival, and their neighbors are like, we don't want them to get back to their old power, basically. So there's a lot of conflictions and problems that are happening at the same time. So the book of Haggai takes about 4 months. It's kind of a window of about 4 months basically, there's not many chapters in Haggai, but just realize it's about a 4-month period that we're going to cover in this. So let's get started with chapter 1. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, in the 1st day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and to Joshua the son of Josedek, the high priest, saying, so this is a revelation basically. So this is, again, probably, 520-ish BC time frame, if you think a 2nd year of Darius. Well, let's get into some there. So there's several people. King Darius is mentioned. Zerubbabel, who is governor of Judah, that's the temple gets named after him. And then Josedek, the high priest, and Joshua the son of Josedek, who was the high priest, basically. In Blair Van Dyke and D. Kelly Ogden's article, Amos through Malachi, Major Teachings of the 12 Prophets, they talk about some of the things that are going on at this time frame. They say political developments played a role in delayed temple construction. Cyrus died and was replaced by his son Cambyses. It's around 530 BC to 522 BC is when Cambyses was there. And as the years passed, the edict of Cyrus was eventually forgotten altogether. At the death of Cambyses, Darius took the throne and was securely in power by 520 BC. A decade and a half had passed and work on the temple had not progressed beyond laying the foundational stones. So just for a second here, just remember, okay, this is the 2nd year of Darius. So Cyrus was the one that did the destructions. He was there. He dies. Cambyses, Cyrus lets him go originally. Cambyses is like, I don't know if we want to let him go. And then Darius comes in and says, yeah, okay, fine, we'll let you go. And that's where we find this story, basically, the 2nd year of Darius. Let's see. A decade and a half had passed and the work on the temple had not progressed beyond laying the foundation stones. Simply the weight of poverty, political disruption, animosities, and a back-breaking need to survive brought the construction to a halt with no new beginning in sight. It was under these circumstances that the Lord raised up Haggai and Zechariah to spur on his beleaguered people. It is likely that Joel also prophesied at this time. In the final analysis, these prophets were successful. So this is the beginning of the 2nd temple period, which was completed around 515 BC, basically. So they survived. The Jews survived. A lot of people are like, they're going to die out there. And then they start to rebuild the temple. And then Cambyses is like, nah, we're not letting more people go back. It hampered it. They're getting hampered by Samaritans and other groups going, we don't want Israel to be their former power. So it struggled. And then Darius is like, yeah, we'll let them go back and do more. So they are finally, and this is where Haggai and other prophets are like, guys, we understand we're in survival mode, but we need to trust in God, work on his temple, and he will bless us with our survival needs, basically. So that's what's going on here. Now, Assyria, realize this is, Assyria abused and scattered their people. Babylon abused and Babylonified the people. Persia tried being nice and letting them do their thing, is the approach. So realize these leaders, okay, remember, Assyria took the northern kingdom, scattered them all over the place. Babylon took them to Babylon and made them be a part of Babylon. So Babylonified them. Persia takes over Babylon, and Persia takes a whole different approach. Persia is the beginning of this new way of thinking about empire building, of going, we're going to let these people be themselves. Assyria didn't want anyone to be themselves. Assyria wanted them to integrate. They would take different groups and they would mash them all together and even them out to homogenize them and then make them all worship the same gods, and just that's where the word assimilate comes from, to make one thing the same as something else. So that was Assyria. Babylon said, we're going to take everybody and make you like us. And Persia said, we're not going to make you be us. We're going to let you be you. We're going to try this new experiment out. And that's what was happening, basically. So it's interesting that this also, when we look at verse 1 here, this revelation is coming to, so he's told to talk to, Haggai is told to talk to the governor of Judah. So they have left Babylon. But now talk to the governor of Judah, so government leaders and the high priest, religious leaders. This is a revelation to both of them. So this is the revelation we get starting here in verse 2. Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, This people say, the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house should be built. And again, they're panicking. They're starving. They're struggling for their own survival. And so they're thinking, I got to take care of myself, and then I'll take care of God second. That's the problem that they're having. Verse 3, Then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? So this is the thing. He's going, is it time to go back and build the temple? Is it time for you to focus on yourself and not God? That's what he's talking about here, basically. And so verse 5, Now therefore, thus saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways, basically. You need to reevaluate your priorities here, basically. Now, also in verse 4, before we leave this one, we talked about sealed houses. That means panels, basically. These are homes. They're actually quite nice. It's like tiled roofs. You know, they've had time to put something together. So they are in a state of survival, but they've had time to take care of their needs. Okay, when they came back, they had lots of survival needs and build the temple, and they were working on both at the same time. Then, because of all the other problems that are happening, economic and political issues and other things, they stopped working on the temple and worked on their own problems for a time. And now this prophecy is coming in, going, you're still saying it's time to work on yourself, but you actually have a decent house. Maybe it's, and God's like, you need to consider your ways. Maybe it's time to go back. So think about your priorities. Think about what you're doing, okay? They're still prioritizing themselves over God. And God's like, look, I didn't complain when you said you needed to learn how to get your food and, get things going to take care of your family, and you stopped doing the temple, but it's time to switch. So God is now realizing it's time for you guys to change your priorities around. This is a great, great metaphor for our day and age. Do we prioritize the things of God in our day and age, or do we prioritize doing what we want first, and then we'll do what God wants later? Very good question for us. So verse 6, Ye have sown much, and bring in little. Ye eat, but ye have not enough. Ye drink, but ye are not filled with drink. Ye clothe you, but there is none warm. And he that earneth wages to put it into a bag with holes. So we look at verse 6 and think about this idea. They're sowing much. So they're working hard to get crops out, but they're not getting the yields. Poor weather conditions could be that. Poor people are stealing at night, so they're not getting all the harvest back. Other people are stealing it from them. They eat but don't have enough. So they have food. They're not dying of starvation, but they're still hungry. They're not full all the time, basically. They're still having challenges. They have drink, but they're not getting enough. So they're doing good, but they're not quite all, not fully abundant at this point, basically. So we can think about this as a sign of economic problems. If you're reliant on your job, if you earneth wages, but you put it in a bag with holes, you're going to lose. And remember back then, the coins themselves that they were earning is where the value was. Not in a fiat currency like today's money in America especially, but in most of the developed world is a fiat currency. It is a fake currency, basically. It's just the IOU of the government saying, hey, we're good for it, keep spending it, we're okay. So the value is in the promise of the government keeping their promise. The value isn't in the coin itself, whereas back then the value was in the coin itself. So if you lose a coin, you literally lost value. So this is the challenge, is they're struggling. Okay, they're trying to build up, but it feels like they can't make it. they're trying to grow and do stuff, but it feels like they keep getting pushed down. So a hard economy, challenges in the economy. There's lots of problems going on. And we could look at it as priorities. They're prioritizing eating and wealth and growth and build bigger houses. And, oh yeah, we have a house, but now we want a bigger house. We have food, but now we want more food. So a question that we could even ask ourselves here, and this is a good one for leadership, from a leadership perspective on this verse, are our meetings and activities checking the box or actually helping people? Because we could also see in verse 6 a metaphor here for spiritualness of these people. They're working hard physically, but they're not doing as much spiritually. So they're spiritually starving. Their spiritual needs are the most distraught out of all the needs that they have. And they're not taking care of those needs. They're focusing too much on physical needs. So there's that priority change. And realize they're not getting, again, the return is not coming back the way they wanted it to. They're putting way more effort in than the return that they're getting, basically. So they're not getting a lot shown for their efforts that they're putting in. Again, priorities. Are you putting the right priorities in place? So we need to be careful with this. And this is what God's trying to say. In fact, verse 7, he says, "Thus the Lord of hosts, saith the Lord of hosts, consider your ways." Now that's the second time he said that so far in this chapter. Verse 5 he said it, and in verse 7 he said it again. So reminding them, you need to think and reevaluate your priorities here, basically. So another way to think about the phrase "consider your ways" that I found was "settle this in your heart." So you need to, you've got some confliction. Let's get rid of that confliction and let's get you going in the right direction. Verse 8, "Go up to the mountain and bring wood, and build the house, and I will take pleasure in it, and I will be glorified, saith the Lord." So now God is telling them, this is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to prioritize yourself. I want you to build my house. I gave you time to work on your stuff, and you're not dying. Granted, you're not, living abundantly, but you're not dying either, basically. So it's time for you to focus on what I need you to focus on, which is building a house to God, basically. So this is prioritizing God in their life, basically. Now this is interesting that when we look at this idea, if we think of in the LDS church, we could look at this idea the same when we think of the temple in Kirtland and Nauvoo, in fact, the Lord, when he gave the saints that commandment to do that, he equated them to Haggai's time. He said, you guys, it's time, you're doing okay. You're suffering, you got some challenges, but you've got some bare minimums in there. It's time to build me a house. And so they focused on building a house to God as well. And it didn't mean they were getting out of poverty. It didn't mean they were improving, but it meant they were doing something that God wanted them to do, focusing on what God wanted. That was that priority. In fact, verse 9, as we continue moving forward, it says, "Ye looked for much, and lo, it came to little." So again, that idea of you're trying to enrich yourself, but it's not helping you. "And when ye brought it home, I did blow upon it. Why, saith the Lord of hosts? Because of mine house that is waste, and ye run every man unto his own house." So this is the thing that they're doing. They're gathering their food, but then the wind comes and scatters the seed out there, and so now they've lost some of their crops. So that's this idea of God blowing upon it. So they're not getting it. They think they're getting it, but then it's not going well. They're earning money, but their spending power is down. They're not getting it there. So they're spending too much time trying to enrich themselves rather than he's going, guys, you've got a nice stable spot. Now let's focus on what I need you to focus on, which is I need you to build me a house. I need you to prioritize God, basically. And I wouldn't say that's a selfish thing to do on God's part. This is him helping them learn how to prioritize and improve themselves. Now he's going to bless them. If they focus on him, he'll bless them. He'll bless the rains. He'll bless the ground. He'll bless the sun so that they have abundance of crops with less effort. But they have to be willing to do what God wants them to do. So verse 10, Therefore, the heaven over you is stayed from dew, and the earth is stayed from her fruit. So here's part of the reason they're not having as much success. They're not getting the return. Again, like he said in 9, there's a wind blowing. Now he says that you're not getting, if there's not dew, there's not moisture. Basically, the earth is stayed from her fruit. So they're not, the Mother Nature isn't helping them to have a good, abundant return on their planting. In fact, verse 11, we get a little bit more detail here. He says, I called for a drought upon the land, and upon the mountains, and upon the corn, and upon the new wine, and upon the oil, and upon that which the ground bringeth forth, and upon men, and upon cattle, and upon all the labor of the hands. So that's part of the reason they have the economic problems they're having, is because God is trying to tell them, guys, I need you to focus and reprioritize yourself. They're not taking the subtle hints, so now they've got prophets like Haggai and others. They're going to come in to say, guys, you need to reprioritize yourself, okay? This is such a good metaphor for us. Where might we be being held back in our life because we're not doing what God wants us to do? We're not following what he would like us to accomplish. Very good question to ask yourself. And now verse 12, then Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and Joshua the son of Josedek the high priest with all the remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the words of Haggai the prophet, as the Lord their God had sent him. And the people did fear before the Lord. So they're actually going, oh, okay, if the prophet says we need to change, we're going to change. So we're going to move in a better direction. They needed just some corrections, and that's good. Verse 13, then spake Haggai the Lord's messenger in the Lord's message unto the people, saying, I am with you, saith the Lord. And the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua the son of Josedek, the high priest, and the spirit of all the remnant of the people, and they came and did work in the house of the Lord of hosts their God. And in the 24th day of the 6th month, in the 2nd year of Darius the king. So they delineate the time frame out again. Now, this is great. Prophet shows up, starts to get the people motivated. They say, okay, we're going to make a different choice. They make the different choice, and because of that, God can now bless them. And he helps their leaders to work with them, and the temple construction starts to happen. Great metaphors, great symbols for us, realizing when we make the choice to follow God, we start down that path. God is already going to be willing to help us and help move things forward, stir us up and stir others to help us to move in the direction we need to go. So keep focused on what the Spirit is telling you to help you, basically, is a very important thing to consider. Now let's jump over to the next chapter as we continue the story of Haggai.